Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today, we're cutting through the noise to get straight to the core of what truly drives organizational success.
Or, maybe more often, why necessary innovation efforts just stall out completely.
Exactly. We are diving deep into a topic that is just so foundational to effective leadership, innovation and organizational change.
That's right. And our mission today is, well, it's explicitly focused on you, the operational manager. We're here to translate some really critical, but often, very complex concepts from organizational theory, power dynamics, communication.
All academic stuff, right?
And turn it into knowledge that you can actually use immediately. We're moving beyond the simple diagrams and, the checklists for change.
And we're digging into the psychological and behavioral mechanics that determine whether an initiative lives or dies. We have a pretty comprehensive stack of material driving this discussion. Our foundation is built on the core Class 3 slides, which guide us through fundamental human motivation.
And then we dive into a really comprehensive reading packet. It's focused specifically on stakeholders, the surprising truth about resistance to change.
Which we will definitely get into.
Oh, yeah. And some really rigorous communication theories, particularly that 4 conversations model.
And these materials, they really challenge the conventional wisdom, the stuff you always hear about why large-scale change efforts consistently fail.
They do. We aren't just exploring what changes in an organization, a new structure, a new technology, a new policy.
That's the easy part.
It is. We are zeroing in on the much more difficult and honestly often neglected question: who changes and how do we ensure they do so willingly and effectively?
Because successful innovation hinges entirely on understanding that human landscape. People's deep-seated motivations, the dynamics of their power relationships, and critically, how intentionally they talk to each other.
Conversation is key.
So the big question for you, the listener, is this. When you're preparing to announce a major organizational change, are you truly prepared for the complex, nuanced human response?
Or are you just planning to fight against what you think is resistance?
Because those two approaches yield entirely different results.
Okay, let's unpack this, starting right at the foundation. The fundamental building blocks of human reaction.
The stuff we often overlook until we're already facing, unexpected friction.
Exactly.
It's kind of remarkable how often organizational theory just skips the psychology class.
Right.
When we talk about major organizational change, we tend to leap straight to strategy, budget allocations, process diagrams.
All the spreadsheets.
But the source material reminds us that at the absolute center of any organizational structure are human beings with deep foundational psychological needs.
And if a change initiative is perceived to violate those needs, you're creating immediate, powerful friction.
Immediately. It doesn't matter how logical your spreadsheet looks.
And the Class 3 slides highlight 2 core categories of these needs that organizations they frequently disregard them: competence and contribution.
Let's start with competence.
People inherently need to be seen as an expert.
Right.
And this is important. They need to be seen as unique. This isn't just vanity. It's a core component of professional identity.
So think about this scenario. You're implementing a new, highly complex software system, and it fundamentally alters the way your veteran staff does their core job. That change can instantly strip away that veteran employee's sense of mastery, their expertise. It reduces them, seemingly overnight, to a novice.
And that loss isn't just about the work itself, is it? It's a direct threat to their self-concept, their unique value within the whole social ecosystem of the organization.
It creates a tremendous amount of psychological threat, and that threat that often manifests as what managers incorrectly label resistance.
Which ties directly into the second core need: contribution.
Right.
People need to be seen as good, and maybe even more critically, seen as helpful, not hurtful.
So when a change is introduced that could potentially make, say, 20 years of your previous effort irrelevant.
Or implies that your past actions under the old system were somehow harmful or wasteful or just inefficient.
You perceive that as a profound judgment.
You've just devalued their entire history with the organization. They see it as a judgment on their moral worth, their effectiveness. And a defense mechanism, like pushback, is practically guaranteed.
Of course. They have to defend the history that defined their professional competence and their contribution.
This psychological lens, it immediately helps us understand a crucial organizational trap that's mentioned in the slides.
The idea that organizations are frequently under-led and over-managed.
Exactly. This imbalance directly affects how innovation is conceived and executed.
So when you are over-managed, the focus is entirely on control, detailed procedure, compliance metrics.
All necessary administrative functions, but profoundly insufficient for driving transformation. Management addresses the logistics of the change.
But being under-led, that means neglecting the critical aspects, the vision, the inspiration, aligning people's fundamental human needs with where you're going.
Leadership has to connect the new mission to the intrinsic desires of the workforce. If you only manage the change, you just address the process symptoms.
But if you lead the change,
You address the heart of motivation. You give people a compelling, value-driven reason to invest their identity and their effort in moving forward.
and this is where the work of Daniel Pink, which is referenced in the slides, it becomes a kind of management blueprint.
It really does. He outlines 3 elements that are absolutely necessary for enhancing that intrinsic drive.
Autonomy, mastery, and purpose.
Autonomy, mastery, and purpose. And we should really use these as diagnostic tools for any change initiative.
Okay, so let's start with autonomy, the desire to direct our own lives.
Right. And a poorly managed, process-heavy change just strips this away completely. It dictates every minute step. It removes personal agency. And again, it threatens that sense of being unique. The manager just becomes a micromanager of compliance.
But a well-led change initiative, it works to preserve or even enhance autonomy.
It could offer choice in how an employee integrates the new system or which new skills they prioritize developing.
Or even a choice in the timeline for adoption.
Exactly. When change removes choice, it generates passive compliance at best. But when it maximizes agency, it taps into real intrinsic motivation.
Okay, then there's mastery, the urge to get better at something that matters.
Right. And if the change initiative feels like a temporary management fad, or just a confusing, poorly supported detour, or if the training is just inadequate and rushed.
There is no pull toward mastery. You're just asking people to slog through a painful transition.
Successful change, though, it has to present a clear, attractive, and attainable path for growth. It should be structured to allow people to transition from being the expert in the old way.
To consciously building the skills to become the new expert in the new way.
And that fulfills their fundamental need for competence. It ensures the change is seen as a career accelerator, not a competency threat. You're essentially just trading one form of expertise for another.
And finally, purpose. The yearning to do what we do in the service of something larger than ourselves.
This circles right back to that under-led problem.
It does.
If the compelling vision for change is missing, if the change is just about cutting departmental costs by 10% or, shuffling boxes on an org chart, it doesn't tap into that deep human need to contribute to something meaningful.
Or to be seen as good.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Purpose provides the ethical, the moral, the functional justification for the immense effort and emotional turbulence that's required during a transition.
What's fascinating here is understanding how these deep-seated psychological needs, competence, contribution, autonomy, mastery, purpose,
They're not just nice to haves. They lay the entire groundwork for understanding why change sometimes stalls instantly.
it is rarely an irrational fear of the unknown.
No, it is a very rational defense of one's identity and value and professional agency within the organization. And if the change doesn't intentionally honor those values, the change agent has already ensured a battle for buy-in.
Right from the start. Okay, so shifting our focus now from the individual psyche to the organizational ecosystem.
The broader landscape.
Successful change relies fundamentally on accurately mapping that landscape of influence. This brings us to a crucial managerial tool, stakeholder identification.
Specifically, the influential framework developed by Mitchell, Agle, and Wood.
Okay, so they start with the broad, formal definition. A stakeholder is any group or individual who can affect or is affected by the achievement of organizational objectives.
Which casts a very wide net. It covers everyone from line employees and suppliers to regulatory bodies and community groups.
But here's the managerial challenge. You can't possibly satisfy everyone simultaneously, especially during resource-constrained change initiatives.
No way. And the sources note that for managers, especially during implementation, stakeholders need to be accessible and urgent to command their attention.
You need a filter.
You need a filter. If you spend equal time listening to every claim, you'll manage none of them. This is why Mitchell, Agle, and Wood introduced the concept of salience.
Which claims are most important and demand immediate managerial attention?
Precisely. And that salience filter is built on three key attributes: power, legitimacy, and urgency.
And the more of these attributes a stakeholder possesses in relation to your organization and your specific change,
The more likely managers are to see them as a defining stakeholder that demands immediate attention and engagement.
okay, so let's define them with some precision. Power. This follows the ideas of Weber, as applied by Pfeffer.
Right. It's defined as the probability that one actor can carry out their will despite resistance.
So pure force or influence.
Pure force. The capacity to make others do something they wouldn't otherwise do or prevent them from doing something they intend to do. It's the raw capacity to impose costs.
And legitimacy, on the other hand, is entirely about perceived validity.
Does this entity have a valid right or claim based on moral, legal, or accepted contractual grounds? The board of directors has clear legal legitimacy. An employee union has a legitimate contractual claim.
But the reading emphasizes that legitimacy and power are distinct. They can exist independently.
And their combination is vital. Weber defined authority as the legitimate use of power.
So an entity might have a perfectly legitimate claim, say an interest group asserting a moral standard.
Right, but unless it has the power to enforce its will, or the claim is seen as urgent, it won't achieve high salience for the managers.
It's a critical distinction. Claims are not enough.
The capacity and the timing to act on them are essential.
Which brings us to the third attribute, urgency.
Urgency reinforces this time-bound reality. It's the degree to which stakeholder claims call for immediate attention. It's derived from the time sensitivity of the claim and how critical the relationship is.
And while the sources don't detail it quite as much, they're clear that the combination of power, legitimacy, and urgency is what creates a truly salient stakeholder.
The one you cannot afford to ignore when you're planning or implementing change. If they have two of the three attributes, they are seen as expecting something, which significantly increases managerial responsiveness.
And the Class 3 slides then provide a crucial layer of detail here. They break down power into three specific types that stakeholders can use.
Which helps managers understand the nature of the influence they face, which then dictates the right response.
Coercive, utilitarian, and normative.
Let's start with coercive power. It's based on force or manipulation, the ability to compel action through threat or negative consequences.
So internally, that could be the threat of disciplinary action. Externally, maybe a regulatory body threatening fines if new standards aren't met.
Exactly. If the legal department forces a system change because of a compliance risk, they are using coercive power.
Then there's utilitarian power, based on resources or material incentives.
This is probably the most common type in business relationships. Suppliers, dominant customers, funders. They often rely on utilitarian power because they control vital economic inputs or outputs.
So if your largest customer threatens to pull their business unless you integrate a new technology platform,
They are exercising utilitarian power. They use material incentives or the threat of withdrawing them to achieve their will.
and finally, normative power.
Based on symbolic influence, things like prestige, cultural norms, or esteem. This is often wielded by entities like industry associations, professional bodies, or even internal quality groups that rely on shared values and reputation.
They influence behavior by appealing to a shared commitment and legitimacy.
If your organization changes its policy to align with a globally recognized sustainability standard, that standard body is exercising normative power. They're appealing to your desire for external prestige and legitimacy.
So connecting this whole sophisticated framework back to change management, it means managerial techniques have to explicitly deal with all these multiple stakeholder relationships.
Using this framework helps managers identify the roles these groups play and anticipate their reactions, whether they'll resist or support, based on their specific blend of power, legitimacy, and urgency.
So for example, if a change threatens a group's established normative authority,
You know immediately that this group will achieve high salience, and you have to manage them proactively. Maybe through co-optation or engagement conversations that validate their legitimacy.
now we transition from identifying these power structures to examining the immediate human reaction to change.
And the source material argues very strongly against the lazy and simplistic idea that resistance is the default, immediate, and universal response.
That's right. The research, particularly Pederit's work that's cited in our readings, suggests the most accurate initial assumption is ambivalence.
Ambivalence. When recipients get a change announcement, they don't immediately leap to opposition. They feel a variety of things.
They might see a positive future for the organization and still have serious doubts about the specific solution.
They might have a generally negative attitude toward management and still recognize the urgent need for change.
Or, very commonly, they're just processing, I don't know how I feel yet.
Ambivalence is the reality,
Oh,
especially with complex or disruptive changes. It's a natural state of information processing.
but the material delivers a sharp warning here about the danger of labeling that complex initial reaction as resistance.
Yes. The reading, Quit Saying Change is Hard, argues that labeling it as resistance is actively counterproductive.
Because it risks creating a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Exactly. When managers assume resistance, they stop listening. They plan for minimization, they plot ways to overcome it, maybe even disguise the true extent of the change.
And this defensive behavior from the change agent, it then elicits the very cautious or defensive reaction they were trying to avoid in the first place.
The goal instead must be to engage recipients on the substance of the change.
Right. Partnerships are only built when the change is clearly communicated, and then critically, a period of genuine, respectful listening happens. You create a space where people feel heard and where their ambivalence can be explored without immediate judgment.
And the reactions people have, they often center on two core distinct areas: the logic of the change and their personal security.
Regarding the change logic, recipients are fundamentally rational. They're asking questions like those identified by Connor, Lake, and Stackman.
What underlying factors require this solution? Why does it need to happen now? Why was this particular solution chosen over other options?
And to address these rational analytical questions, you have to understand how people process information. Cotter and Cohen's distinction between analyze, think, and see, feel is crucial here.
The analyze-think approach relies on rational logic models, stating, we have this problem, therefore we must adopt this logical solution.
But that cold logic is rarely sufficient to gain full emotional commitment.
Right. You have to complement the logic model with the see-feel approach. You use vivid examples, compelling stories, or concrete experiences from elsewhere.
This provides an emotional connection. It helps recipients grasp the genuine need for the change and the new reality more fully.
People often need both. They need the logical argument and the tangible experience, the feeling to achieve a full understanding of a situation.
Then there are the reactions that challenge personal security,
which are deeply emotional and identity-based. They reflect those fundamental human needs for competence and contribution we talked about earlier.
The questions here are highly internal. Can I personally make this transition? Can I learn this new skill set? How will I be seen by my peers? Will I lose power? Will I lose status?
These challenges require a different type of managerial intervention. They demand absolute clarity of impact, individual discussions, and proactively offering robust reassurance on assistance and training.
There's a key tactic we've seen used effectively, the storytelling exercise, like asking team members to sign their name with their non-dominant hand.
That's a great example. You generate those immediate feelings of awkwardness, frustration, and embarrassment that inevitably come with learning any new complicated task.
And this simple shared experience allows the team to process those transition emotions together. It emphasizes the need for practice, dedicated training.
And crucially, grace from leadership. It validates that the difficulty is real, but temporary.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though. The realization that what is labeled resistance is often a self-serving attribution by the change agent.
Ford, and D'Amelio emphasize that the prevailing views of resistance are entirely change agent-centric. They locate the entire problem within the recipient.
This perspective presumes that resistance is an accurate, objective report by unbiased observers.
But the material forcefully argues that resistance is not an objective reality. It's an interpretation, a label assigned by the agent to recipient behaviors.
So change agents, often expecting resistance because of internal narratives or past failures, a self-fulfilling prophecy, are predisposed to find it.
They interpret caution or legitimate critique as intentional obstruction.
And here is the core management vulnerability. Invoking the label resistance allows agents to safely create a self-serving account.
It immediately attributes unexpected problems, delays, or failures to the recipients, which mitigates the agent's personal responsibility. They locate resistance over there in them.
Shifting the blame from systemic factors, which are often under the agent's control, like inadequate resources or poor planning, to the recipient's perceived lack of cooperation.
For example, an agent might know they failed to secure the budget for 3 weeks of high-quality training when the staff performs poorly with the new system.
The agent can avoid admitting resource failure by saying, the team is just resistant to learning the new process.
They protect their professional reputation by externalizing the blame.
The reality is that change agents actively contribute to the very reactions they label as resistance in three distinct, avoidable ways.
The first is through broken agreements and the loss of trust that follows.
Right. When agents renege on a clear promise or breach an expected pattern of cooperation, a violation of the psychological contract, it leads to deep resentment, cynicism.
And negative behaviors that the agent then conveniently labels as resistance.
This is especially toxic in organizations that go through serial change, where existing agreements are frequently broken.
Agents who fail to repair these damaged relationships, maybe through a sincere public apology or providing genuine closure on the old system, are guaranteed to encounter behaviors labeled resistance later on.
Cynicism is the defense mechanism against repeated betrayal.
The second major contribution is communication breakdowns. This includes the failure to legitimize the change with compelling justifications that overcome existing counterarguments.
If the agent's rationale is weak, recipients can easily create their own counter-narrative, effectively inoculating themselves against future change efforts.
Communication breakdowns also involve misrepresentation, and this isn't always intentional malice. Often it's just optimism bias.
The agents, being deeply committed to the idea, oversell the positive outcomes and undersell the negative transition costs.
But the result is the same: perceptions of injustice and violation of trust when the actual results don't meet those inflated projections.
And crucially, agents often make the mistake of assuming that understanding is sufficient to produce action.
Yes. They spend massive amounts of time on conversations for understanding, explaining the why, but they neglect conversations for performance, explaining the how.
So because they provide no rigorous call for action, no specific requests and promises, they fail to mobilize results.
Then they inappropriately attribute this lack of action to recipient resistance, rather than their own ineffective communication mix.
And the third way agents contribute is by resisting resistance itself.
They can display defensiveness, seeing any critique or counterproposal from recipients as a personal effort to undermine the entire change effort.
And this managerial defensiveness just escalates the conflict into a vicious cycle where resistance begets more resistance instead of productive dialogue.
This brings us to the radical, powerful reframe. Resistance should be seen as a resource.
Not merely a dysfunctional obstacle to be eliminated. It has valuable functional contributions to the existence, engagement, and long-term strength of the change.
First, there is existence value. Criticism, complaints, talking negatively about the change. It paradoxically keeps the topic in play.
It doesn't allow it to die silently through neglect.
Exactly. This continuous conversation allows for further clarification, translation, and diffusion of the change details. If people genuinely wanted a change initiative to fail completely, they should stop talking about it entirely. That's the extinction principle.
Second, resistance has engagement value. Resistance, especially when it's thoughtful and well-reasoned, reflects a higher level of psychological involvement than passive, unthoughtful acceptance.
This connects directly to reactance theory, which posits that people react against perceived threats to their freedom and autonomy. When an employee argues passionately against a proposed solution, they are showing they care enough to invest their mental energy in the outcome.
That passionate argument is valuable feedback.
It is. Agents can listen to this resistance to adjust the pace, the scope, or the sequencing of the change. The absence of resistance, in fact, might be the true signal of danger.
A sign of disengagement and apathy. The staff simply doesn't care enough to argue.
But how do we distinguish between, legitimate, resource-rich critique and just outright obstruction that wastes time?
Right. Doesn't the manager risk derailing the whole process by entertaining every bad idea?
That's where managerial skill comes in. You differentiate by analyzing the source and the logic of the resistance. If the feedback is logically sound, pointing out a resource deficit, a technological incompatibility, a missing step, it's a resource.
And if it's purely emotional, attacking the person or the motive.
That requires a different trust-repairing response. The key is engagement. You treat the critique not as an attack, but as a counteroffer that needs careful consideration.
Which leads us to the third value, strengthening value.
Resistance is a form of conflict, and functional conflict can dramatically strengthen the quality of decisions and participants' commitments. Conflict requires the change agent to create better arguments, secure more resources, and build stronger commitment to the final adopted plan.
That makes sense. The need to overcome resistance, or even just the threat of it, forces change agents to adopt significantly better management practices.
Exactly. Like communicating extensively, providing necessary resources upfront, and creating clear performance expectations. The change that emerges from thoughtful conflict is typically more robust and resilient than a change that was just rubber-stamped.
Okay, so now that we understand the psychological and political landscape, we can move to the tool that ties it all together: intentional communication.
Right. As we've established, frequent communication is necessary, but it has to be intentional and appropriate. Successful change, according to Ford and Ford, is fundamentally a product of using the right type of conversation at the right time.
The critical insight here is that managers may not even realize they have a default conversational pattern, a profile that's leading to poor outcomes.
A manager might be talking constantly, feeling productive, but if they are using the wrong type of conversation for the needed outcome, they will see zero progress.
And that's where the four conversations model is revolutionary. It differentiates communication entirely by its explicit purpose.
It helps managers develop what Ford and Ford call the ability to see what they say, allowing them to conduct a systematic intervention on their own communication patterns.
Let's define the four types clearly. First, the initiative conversation.
Its purpose is purely to start, launch, or open a new avenue for consideration. It creates a new possibility. It takes the form of proposals or suggestions.
Okay. Second is the understanding conversation.
This provides opportunities for all participants to comprehend the vision, the rationale, the scope, creating shared meaning. It supplies rationale, removes ambiguity, and allows for questioning.
But we have to stress this again. It is not intended to produce action itself. Understanding is a prerequisite, not an action driver.
That's the most common mistake.
Yeah.
Third, and this is the vital connection to getting results, is the performance conversation.
The heavy lifter.
It is the heavy lifter. It is the only conversation designed explicitly to generate specific action and measurable results. This involves specific requests and promises, rigorously specifying the who, what, when, where for the action.
A request is what starts the action, and a promise is the necessary commitment that completes the request, often including a delivery deadline.
And if your request lacks a clear deadline, it's structurally flawed. It lacks the rigor to produce accountability.
And the fourth is the closure conversation.
Essential for accountability. It's intended to complete or close the loop on open requests or promises. It builds trust and accountability through things like status reports, formal recognition, acknowledgments of completion, or even apologies for delays.
Or postmortems.
Yeah. Postmortems, exactly.
And the conversational profile is the practical tool that makes this model actionable.
Right. Managers log their interactions, classify them into these four types, plus gossip and complaint, and graph the relative frequency. And while there's no single ideal ratio, the successful implementation of change is a function of conversations that rigorously reflect the context.
So if you're launching something, you need initiative. You need people to execute.
You need performance and closure.
The reading provides 3 excellent case studies demonstrating the sheer power of shifting this profile. The first is Brad, managing the wireless project. He was experiencing frustrating stagnation.
Brad felt he was constantly talking about the project, worrying about it, engaging his staff. But when he analyzed his profile, he was shocked.
Over 2 weeks, he had logged only 2 conversations about the project.
And both of them were understanding conversations, just explaining why the wireless network was necessary.
Yeah.
He had conflated worrying and thinking about the project with actively managing it.
His primary flaw was using understanding conversations when execution was needed.
Understanding is inappropriate for putting people into action.
So Brad realized he needed to dramatically increase the frequency and, more importantly, shift his focus to performance conversations, making explicit requests with deadlines and closure conversations.
Rigorous follow-up. And by focusing his time intentionally, the project was completed months earlier than expected.
The second case involves Michelle, a senior manager leading a major training project. She was also frustrated, despite frequent communication.
Her profile showed a better mix. She was using understanding and performance conversations, but results still stalled.
And her deeper analysis revealed a weakness in the quality of her performance conversations.
Right. She rarely obtained firm promises, and critically, her requests almost universally lacked deadlines. They met the who, what, where, but failed on the when.
So without deadlines, there was no rigorous accountability and no non-negotiable basis for follow-up.
Which led to an absence of closure conversations. She was waiting for things to happen instead of making and following up on clear, time-bound promises.
Once she included hard deadlines in her requests and consciously integrated closure conversations, following up, acknowledging completion, demanding apologies for failure, her project accelerated significantly.
It proves that the rigor and quality of the conversation structure matters just as much as the frequency.
The third case involves Jason and his tale of two projects. He was managing two separate installations with the exact same team.
Project A new type of technology installation, was going very well. Project B, a familiar routine installation, was bogged down and riddled with errors.
And he was baffled because the people involved were identical.
The profiles showed that Project A, because it was new and risky, used a balanced mix of all four conversations, a highly participatory, rigorous approach.
But Project B, because it was familiar, used excessive understanding conversations and critically lacked closure conversations entirely.
Jason admitted that his assumptions about the familiar project led him to believe he could cut corners. He just explained the assignments, that's understanding, and made general assignments weak performance, expecting them to execute without needing follow-up.
The failure to use closure conversations eliminated accountability. It caused the routine project to fail while the difficult one succeeded.
Which powerfully illustrates that a manager can have varied conversational profiles, often driven by their own assumptions about the task. The manager's communication pattern was the primary factor in progress, not the people involved.
So the key takeaway here is absolutely clear. Frequent communication is never enough. It has to be appropriate, rigorously designed, and intentional.
Managers who are constantly communicating explanations heavy on understanding conversations may never realize they're getting unexpected results because they are using the wrong tools for action.
Okay, so our final segment synthesizes much of what we've discussed. It outlines the 8 factors that condition successful change implementation, drawn from the broad consensus in the literature that was reviewed by Fernandez and Rainey.
Right. And these factors are seen as having additive effects that smooth the entire process. It's not necessarily a rigid linear checklist.
And we can clearly see how these factors integrate the psychological, relational, and communicative concepts we've covered. Let's start with the first factor: ensure the need.
This links directly back to the initiative conversation and the need for purpose. Managerial leaders must not only verify the need, but persuasively communicate its urgency and desirability.
Crafting a compelling vision that is easy to articulate and appealing to organizational members.
And this requires effective communication, but also active participation from recipients to transmit those core messages, ensuring everyone believes the change is needed and it's in their best interest to change.
Factor 2. Provide a plan.
Convincing people of the need is insufficient. The vision has to be translated into a clear, specific course of action, a strategy with goals and milestones.
And this strategy must rest on sound causal theory, meaning we believe that if we implement A, it will logically lead to outcome B.
And the plan has to be clear and specific, deliberately avoiding ambiguity. Because policy ambiguity allows recipients to reinterpret the change plan, which undermines implementation and just generates confusion.
Factor 3. Build internal support and overcome resistance.
This involves encouraging genuine participation and open discussion to mitigate those feelings of ambivalence we talked about.
So tactics like criticism, threats, and coercion are counterproductive.
Very. And while many tactics exist, the sources emphasize that the single most important aspect of change success is urgency.
Urgency is typically created by a crisis or an external challenge, but leaders may often need to actively create dissatisfaction with the current state of affairs to initiate movement.
But building support also means engaging in open participation that allows employees to voice their ambivalence without fear of retribution, thereby addressing those deep-seated security challenges and identity threats.
Factor 4. Ensure top management support and commitment.
A dedicated individual idea champion or powerful guiding coalition must advocate for and lead the transformation, marshaling resources and overcoming inevitable obstacles.
This top-down support is critical, especially in environments where power is diffuse or where political turnover is frequent.
Right. Leadership continuity directly affects follow-through. A collective leadership group might be necessary in more pluralistic organizations.
Factor 5. Build external support.
This acknowledges the reality of external stakeholders, tying right back to our discussion on salience and power dynamics.
Managers must actively develop support from political overseers, external community groups, and key, powerful stakeholders.
Because their coercive or utilitarian power can impose statutory changes, control the flow of vital resources, or outright halt the change effort. Outright opposition by strong interest groups often requires modification of the proposed changes.
Factor 6, provide resources. This seems obvious, but
It is so frequently neglected. Successful change requires adequate financial, human, and technological resources allocated upfront.
planned change is stressful. It requires the redeployment of scarce resources.
And failure to provide sufficient resources leads to feeble efforts, higher levels of interpersonal stress, and overtaxing your people.
Which we know is a major predictable contributor to cynicism and the creation of those behaviors managers label as resistance.
Exactly. Factor 7, institutionalized change.
This links directly to the closure conversation, doesn't it?
It does. To make change enduring, new policies and behaviors must be incorporated into the organizational structure and routines, a process called routinization.
Strategies include modifying formal organizational structures, adapting human resource practices like performance reviews and incentives,
Using organizational rites and ceremonies to mark the change, and rigorous monitoring of implementation to ensure new behaviors displace the old ones and prevent backsliding.
and finally, Factor 8, pursue comprehensive change.
Leaders must develop an integrative approach that achieves subsystem congruence. Organizations are complex systems composed of interdependent subsystems: training, incentives, structure, work design, culture.
Changes in one subsystem must align consistently with the desired end state across all others.
Right. For instance, if you change your structure to require more teamwork, but you keep an incentive system that only rewards individual output, you have subsystem incongruence.
And the change will fall short, as the structure does not support the desired new behavior.
It can't.
We've covered so much ground in this deep dive, from the fundamental human needs for competence, contribution, autonomy, mastery, and purpose.
Through the strategic lens of stakeholder power, legitimacy, and urgency.
And finally, to the crucial role of communication rigor, exemplified by the 4 conversations model.
It bears repeating that managing organizational change is fundamentally not about engaging in some heroic struggle to overcome resistance that's located solely in other people. It is about managers taking profound responsibility for their own conversational patterns, addressing their contributions to difficulty like broken agreements, communication misrepresentations, or weak performance calls.
And rigorously ensuring they track, alter, and follow up on their conversations.
The manager is the primary conversational bottleneck.
The realization that the change agent must shift their identity from a warrior against opposition to a partner in refinement it's perhaps the most profound realization here.
It requires leaders to check their own self-serving attributions at the door.
And the most profound insight from our sources is precisely that. Change managers must be willing to treat challenging recipient feedback, what they often quickly label as resistance, not as a threat to be eliminated,
but as a counteroffer. This critique is a resource that has the potential to update and refine the change, making it more successful and enduring in the long run.
This perspective shifts your role from simply enforcing a pre-written mandate to engaging contributions to strengthen the quality and commitment to the final decision.
So the final thought for you to consider is this. Next time someone challenges your change initiative, don't ask yourself, how do I make them stop resisting?
Instead, ask,
what is the valuable counteroffer embedded in this feedback, and how can I adjust my plan or my conversation profile to incorporate it?
Thank you for joining us on the deep dive. We hope this has equipped you with the framework necessary to lead your next organizational change initiative with intention, clarity, and most importantly, effective conversation.
Until next time, be intentional with your conversations and your commitments.